Here we go. We're going to do this. Welcome back to the Before Work Podcast, episode 8. Be sure to look us up on Twitter at Before Work Pod. Listen to us at Apple, Spotify, and on Google Play. And hey, any comments, questions, or concerns you might have for us, you can email us at beforeworkpodcast@gmail.com. How are we doing this morning?
We both have those really tired sounding voices, but you know what? It'll get better as we go. I think it also makes us sound really deep.
It's voices of regret. That's what it's like morning regret.
We stayed up too late. That's what those voices equal. I also think if you guys want to fact check us, like if we say something and you're like, no, that's completely wrong, please let us know. We don't want to be living our lives thinking the wrong things.
Right. But we do want you to think the wrong things if you listen to us. So if you don't want to fact check us, just believe everything we say.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we're always right. That's how that works.
Or at least in our heads, that's how it works. So we were just talking about, we'll kick off with this. Reading an article here. It says that Pepsi climbs as sales growth and buybacks offset profit outlook. So I was just saying, like, how do companies like Pepsi continue to grow? They're Pepsi. They're already enormous. They've been enormous for decades upon decades, and they continue to grow year after year. They get bigger. And Grant was talking about the fact that these companies just buy up other companies in order to grow because maybe their main product has hit a ceiling. Is that the idea there?
No, I mean, you got to think, first of all, you got some of it's like, it's pseudo growth. You know, you have the dollar amount their worth is increasing because of inflation, but you also got to think about population growth. I mean, when you have more people, when you can have more people to sell to, so you can have a natural growth as population goes up. But they also come out with new products and new other stuff. And again, they take their profits and they buy other things and other adventures. And you got to think also the amount of soda pop or Coke, I don't know, whatever you call it, in whatever land you're from, is going up. So especially when it comes to like drink companies, the amount of things that aren't water that people are drinking, the volume of it is going up. So you got that. So yeah, it's different, but I mean, the food industry is really interesting. My parents, their business is involved with that, so I have a little bit more insight into that world. But a lot of it is all owned by the same company. Like, and what I think is the most interesting is fruit juices. People love their Ocean Spray, and they love their brand names. It's all the same. When I say
it's all the same,
when I say it's all the same, I don't mean like, oh, it's all comes from grapes, it all comes from cranberries. No, like literally, Ocean Spray makes it for everybody. It'll come down the line, and they'll, for 100 bottles, it's Ocean Spray, and then the next 100 bottles is Great Value from Walmart. Literally coming from the same plant.
I love that, dude.
So you can go and you can buy your Ocean Spray for $8 a bottle or whatever ridiculous it is,
or
you
the
can
Great
go
Value brand
for $2.
For $2, and it's the exact same thing.
So like that's really interesting. to me.
I love that about big business, and I love that people don't know that.
Yeah, like it
gives me such a good laugh.
It makes way more sense for them to just make it for everybody because just cost wise, they're still making tons of money.
You mean it makes more sense for them to have these different, they have the same product but different brands and different labels because of demand by certain people.
Well, yeah, like they've already invested in the equipment and everything in the system. Like they could say, no, we don't screw the competitors. We're gonna, or they can say, wait, we're already making it all, so why not just charge them to keep making it? We still have our brand that still sells, and like because in a certain regard, you kind of have like brand recognition where like Ocean Spray can only sell so much Ocean Spray because the some people just don't want Ocean Spray, or it's not accessible, or they want to buy the cheaper stuff or whatever. So instead of saying, well, we're going to stick with whatever we have and make other people try to compete with us, they say, we'll make it for everybody, and then there's no competitors trying to beat us on production,
right?
And then they get all the sales.
Yeah,
like, no matter who's buying it, they're the ones making it, so they make that money that way. And there's the same thing like cereals.
It's a little
bit different there. So like cereals is a little different because it's the same plant that might be making the cereal, but they do have the formula for specific brands. So like, but at the same time, like the quality that can be held is the same, because the formula would be different. You can say, I like the taste of this cereal better than others. In some places, though the formula is the same. Like, this company owns the plant. Like, General Mills owns this plant that's making whatever. And they're just like, we'll make it all the same because it's just cheaper and easier. Like, and stuff like that happens. So it's really interesting in that way. You know, but there's also these giant companies that all own everything. Like, you just have these, and they have, tons of stuff, and they'll even have competing stuff. So, like, you could be buying these two different brands of mustard, and they're owned by the same company. So either way, they're winning. Like,
and could you imagine being at the top of that food chain? Like, the single person that is just at the highest level of that company. You have to be like, I'm sure all those, well, I'm not going to assume that they're all men, but all those people,
most statistically,
statistically, I'd say an overwhelming amount are men, and there's reason behind that. And Jordan Peterson has some great stuff on that topic, but most of those people are all just very similar.
Yeah,
in that they love to work, 100 hours a week. Like, they might have a family, but work's their priority.
Yeah,
like if you're dumping 100 hours a week into something, that's your priority.
Yeah,
because you're sleeping for let's just say you're sleeping for 50 hours a week.
Yeah,
so it's like, yeah, man, those people have to all be the same, and mostly men. Let's just be honest.
But I also think this is also an interesting thing about food industry stuff, is that, and most people don't think about this actively, but sometimes when there's like a big merger, you'll see in the news like, oh, this company is buying this other company.
Sure.
Like when you have like Kraft Heinz, when they merge, people were like, nothing really changes for anybody day to day. Like when you work for Kraft or you worked for Heinz and they merged, literally when they were just Kraft and they became Kraft Heinz, that
sure.
transition overnight. Nothing. I mean, nothing changed for the normal Kraft
even
or Heinz
from
worker.
Employee perspective, like there was a different logo on their paycheck.
Yeah, like there's so much that is so different, and like these companies are owned by other companies, but they still are somewhat autonomous. Like the people who are in charge of the conglomerate have no concern about the day to day of the farther down. Like they're saying, look, you're a successful company. We had this money to spend to buy you,
right?
So we could gain your profits.
That's exactly
consolidating profits. So like
it's like they're not trying to come in and overhaul overhaul anything unless they're buying a bankrupt company.
Yeah,
just because they're like, oh, it's super cheap and we know we can make it better. But like Heinz was doing fine.
Yeah, these are more about, and some of it's also so that they can, they want to make products better. Or they want to be able to like
maybe they have a streamlined production service, or like a streamlined
some of it's
to
like
be able
a
to
network.
get the product to store it right.
Yeah, some of it's like a network where you can better get your product somewhere else because you now have access to like more stuff. So sometimes they buy this company because they want the manufacturing portion of what they already have. So that way they're mostly a West Coast company, so they buy some East Coast stuff so that they can then now duplicate their work on both sides. Stuff like that happens. But I mean, again, it's very interesting. So like that. So there is some, like depending on what kind of off-brand stuff, there is stuff that does taste worse. Like Pop-Tarts for sure. No one besides Pop-Tarts can make Pop-Tarts taste like Pop-Tarts. I just said Pop-Tarts a lot. But
Pop-Tarts.
So that's one place. But then when you go to like some potato chips, I mean, they're literally all the same. Juice, they're all the same.
Juice is so darn similar.
And
people will pay over double for certain labels.
Yeah, and where you get like really interesting is some of the more niche stuff that's getting more popular. You have like almond milk. Almond milk is a really specific process, and a lot of it's just coming from the same place, because once you get a big enough production, it just makes sense, like it just to make everybody's almond milk, like, and it's all coming from physically, geographically a similar location. So
sure.
So like most almonds are coming from specific parts of the country. It's not like everybody's growing almonds everywhere.
Yeah, it's not like there's state by state competitions here.
Yeah, it's mostly coming from one place and being sent to other places, and they're not, and like people don't realize that, depending on the product, some products it makes sense, other products it doesn't. Like where the stuff is grown is often where it's made for the end product. Like orange juice is like people aren't shipping whole oranges to get processed into juice from, Florida to South Dakota. Like, it's just not how that works. They're
shipping the juice.
They're shipping the juice. So
right.
Ship
the juice. Oh, that sounds like if I was a gangster and I always had a catchphrase, ship the juice, man. Doesn't that sound like
you're a gangster that peddles steroids? Yeah.
That's something that I feel like gangs and underground groups never really. I'm sure that there's a huge steroid underground, service that we're just not aware of because we don't use them. But steroids aren't super and I don't know. You think more people would sell steroids?
Well, I think they're pretty easily accessible.
It's not. It's one of those things too where it's like a lot of people are just totally fine with them. Whereas I would say a majority of people when it comes to hard drugs are yeah, drugs are bad. Even a lot of drug users are yeah, drugs are pretty bad. But when it comes to steroids, there's still this debate of steroids aren't terrible.
Well, steroids are interesting to me because really steroids are only looked down upon in sports. I mean, in medicine,
right?
I mean,
in medicine, they're incredible.
They do everything. You get surgery. They give you steroids for recovery. You get a scratch in your eye. You're getting steroid drops to help heal it. 'Cause steroids, help your body repair fast. That's the point of steroids in lifting.
Exactly.
So they're pretty easily to get. Where you have problems is when you have really, really, really strong steroids that you take for long periods of time. There are some repercussions to that.
Sure, on your heart and certain organs and whatnot.
What I think what's even more incredible right now, and they've been doing more and more, is taking testosterone when you are older and your testosterone levels start to drop off. And actually we were talking about how I just realized the other day that Joe Rogan is 51.
Yeah, it's crazy.
He takes testosterone.
Yeah,
and he takes a bunch of other stuff, but testosterone just makes guys in their 40s feel like they're in their 30s, and in their 50s feel like they're in their 30s or 40s. It helps your body recover faster. You go out and you do something and you work really hard, or you have a house project where you have to dig a trench and lay down some drain lines or something, and you're 50. Next day you're just I feel awful. But if you're on testosterone, you're just all right. I'm a little sore. It was a little bit of a rough day, but they just go back to their life.
Yeah,
it's testosterone is magic.
Yeah, it is disappointing where there's such that two-way view of steroids where it's again, if you're in Congress for some reason you hate steroids, but if you're in the medical field, steroids are saving lives. So it's
it's also sports. So it's
I don't know. It's crazy how it's one of those things, and it's the same way with pot. Is people are saying that pot is doing this, and this, and there are certainly some negative side effects to pot, but it's so the side effects are so glamorized by certain people groups that it's making pot look like as soon as and we're not advocating pot in any way. We're not also. I also think that it gets a bad rap.
For sure.
And I feel like steroids do as well. And again, we're not advocating any, and we don't use either, but to my knowledge. But have you been on steroids?
I've not been juicing.
Okay, but I feel like steroids. You can't say, well, in this field, steroids are the greatest thing ever, but in this field, steroids are killing people immediately. That's just not fair to the product.
Yeah. There's got to be a sort of a scientific, a realistic perspective. There's a time and place for a lot of things. I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the use of medical marijuana and CBD that I think is really fascinating. And I also think that there's a lot of realistic stuff where you should not use marijuana when you are younger. How your body processes it and where it stores it and stuff. You're better off to wait till you are fully developed. I mean,
mid 20s.
Yeah, early to mid 20s, depending on your body. I mean, and then some of that's that just for health reasons, it makes more sense to wait till then. I know when you're 12,
I'm sure
it feels like it's you're 25 is light years away. Like you're never going to reach that point. But
because I'm sure physically and mentally, because again, your brain doesn't fully develop until you're in your 20s anyway. So
yeah, and there's plenty of studies out there showing that when you're younger, especially when you're like really developing, around puberty, marijuana has a lot of negative side effects. Not like it's going to kill you, but it slows down certain developments, and it makes your memory worse. It makes motivation worse and stuff like that. And again, it's not like if you smoke marijuana one time when you're 14, you're going to die.
Right.
But it's also not like. It's also not the other way where people are like marijuana will, cure everything. This is the solution to all disease. If everyone just smokes pot from the time they're born to the time they die, they'll live forever because death won't even happen.
Yeah, it's and again, just to clarify one more time, we are not saying to use these things. We are not advocating them, but I want the conversation to be realistic. Like, can marijuana be a gateway drug? Yeah. But I don't think that's necessarily the marijuana. Like people don't smoke pot and then say, I need to go use some meth right now. Like I feel like it's the mentality behind, again, especially for kids, it's the mentality behind using a drug, right? So it's like mentally, if you're not developed, well then your mind is just not going to be wise enough to say, okay, pot is where I end. You're just going to want to kind of keep pushing that limit. So I don't see pot as as you take a hit of a joint where you're just like, okay, now I immediately just have to go to the next step here.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as that, but so many people give it that personality of like, oh, if you start smoking pot, if you start smoking, you're going to start, if you start smoking cigarettes, you're going to start smoking pot. If you start smoking pot, you're going to start using meth. Like I see it as more of a mental struggle as opposed to what those things do to the human body.
Yeah, and again, there's so much about it that's just like it's more nuanced, but also
which actually
it's cultural. It's also it's a lot of stuff.
Which again, just to kind of tie these together, it's the same way with steroids. Like if you use steroids, I don't see you immediately becoming a rage monster.
Yeah,
like that's such a false narrative of the reality of what it is.
Also, your balls aren't going to shrivel up and fall off.
Exactly, and like you're not going to grow hair on your nose. Like, like that's just. There's been so many false statements that have been super debunked, but aren't discussed for whatever reason. And again, I'm sure that's because big business, politics, whatever, doesn't want the realness of the issue getting out there. But like, again, we can go as conspiracy theory as we want to go here, but. It's just I'm so tired of these things not being given the right, not being given the truth of what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think some of it you have, like when it comes to steroids. I think also steroids use is probably falling because we've come up because mostly driven by sports. We've learned so much about how to maximize the natural processes of the body, like how to recover in the most efficient way, how to recover fastest in the shortest amount of time, and how to lift properly, how to work out properly, how to do all sorts of stuff, like how to
even eating wise, and how eating certain things can help you recover.
Yeah, and like all sorts of stuff. I think what's really interesting, and I've always laughed about this, was that like blood doping was a thing for a while, and then they sort of realized
is that like taking out your blood and then putting it back in, like
well,
whenever it's
you take your blood out and you increase your red blood cell content and put it back in. So basically, you just like are concentrating your body's ability to move oxygen because
it just becomes like super efficient.
But you know what also increases red blood cell content? High altitude. So so you can fake it, which is cheating, or you can just
train in high altitude.
Train in high altitude, and also if you can't do that, or well, you do that partially. So you obviously you don't go to the Everest and start hiking around where it's like super thin air and you're like barely functioning. Or would you actually do what most people do is they go somewhere like Denver where it's you have high altitudes. You get that.
I think that's where the Olympic Like I think the Olympic Training Center is in.
Well, we have a couple
Do we?
Olympic training centers. Depending, there's certain sport disciplines and stuff, and most of them are in high altitude areas. So you have high altitude. People go to certain parts of like Argentina and Chile where there's like nice cities, but they're really high up. They do training there, and then they also do the altitude chambers when they sleep. Because then that you can simulate even higher. So you're already at, let's say you're at a mile high or a mile and a half high, 2 miles high. You can simulate 3 or 4 miles high when you're sleeping, when you don't need to be doing anything physical, but your body's adapting to that. So you get much higher red blood cell content, and in your lungs you start to develop more different capillaries, so you can pull more oxygen from each breath, stuff like that your body naturally wants to do and naturally learns, like naturally adapts to. So you can just do that, which is not cheating. Which I mean, again, is interesting.
I'm trying to think of, I can't remember his name. He won a Tour de France or maybe multiple Tour de France's. And anyone only ever knows Lance Armstrong, but it's the other person who's actually good at biking. But he did that. He used the altitude chambers.
Yeah.
And word got out that he did, and he got his title stripped from him because he used those altitude chambers, because that was considered cheating in whatever capacity, which blows my mind.
Which is different. Different sports have different rules. Like,
yeah, it's true.
I know that in swimming that's not a thing. Like they all use altitude chambers.
Yeah,
like, and in triathlons and stuff.
And they shave they have no hair on their bodies. Like they shave their
bodies. They do all sorts of like everyone wants to find the way to be able to maximize. Well, yeah,
because I guess that they're dealing with milliseconds at that point. Like,
Yeah, it just depends on all sorts of different stuff, and it just depends on the culture around it, because you got to think like, there's different cultural sensitivities to certain things in different sports. I mean, like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, and also there's just different things require different efficiencies. I mean, obviously in swimming, having no hair, they shave themselves head to toe, which gotta be weird. But people in the UFC aren't shaving, because that's not. Like, that doesn't help them. Like they're like being, being slick isn't necessarily a hyper advantage. Right. Maybe if you're doing a fair bit of grappling and you want to be really slick, you could do it. But
I'll tell you what, I don't know if it's the deal now. In the old school days of the UFC, if you had long hair, your opponent could grab your hair, and you use your hair for leverage.
Huh.
Which again, I think that's probably still a rule, but most guys are just having short hair so that their opponent doesn't have that.
Or if they have longer hair, they'll like do crazy corn. The girls do that. The women UFC stuff. Their hair's all like cornrowed into crazy patterns, and to make it as short as possible, because they want to have long hair for every other time they're not fighting.
Right.
But then have it short for when they're fighting, without having to like pull out the clippers.
And there were some guys in the old school UFC days, and obviously in old school martial arts, but in UFC where it's kind of like no holds barred. There were a couple guys that would wear a gi, which is just fighting garb. So it's like jiu-jitsu, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu garb, and it's like the big kind of white coat with the belt and everything. They would wear that in UFC fights, and their opponent, again, could just grab onto it and just twist you and use it. But because of the old tradition, they would want to wear a gi, because of, again, just tradition and just, paying respects to the guys that taught them. But like, again, no one, like, people wear fight shorts now that are skin tight, so that their opponent just has no way to grab them in any capacity.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency and maximizing all that stuff, which is super interesting. I mean,
it's very.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much for anything that's competitive. Competition's all about skill and strategy. Like, those are the two things, and there's all sorts of different strategy. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's this, doesn't matter if it's like in golf. Like, you're not necessarily interacting with other people, and it's not necessarily some of the steroids is going to be a thing in golf, but they're finding the most efficient clubs, and they're finding the most efficient balls, and the most efficient techniques to be able to do whatever they can. Like, they're all about they're working on their technique, because on 1/5 of a degree off on their rotation in this way can affect the ball, and like they're all about maximizing all of that. So it's very interesting. Video games, competitive video gaming, they do the same thing, where they're trying to figure out, like, and when you talk about like speed runs, they spend hours just prepping on like the most ridiculous things, like, oh, and if I can make these jumps here and here, and if I can get this glitch to happen just right, boom, I shaved off the time.
Pixel perfect jumps, man.
Or when you even talking about I'm not sure how good it is these days, but when we had the MLG days of the shooting games, they were all about like how to best do everything. Like, they'd practice. They'd practice. I remember watching. This is gonna, again, show, my nerd is showing here, but when they had the Halo competitive, Halo 3 MLG was like the peak of Halo competitive gaming in my opinion. And I remember you'd watch every start of every single map. They all had a specific way they throw their grenades every time. They start out, they look up in the specific spot, and they chuck grenades. And one of every 100 games, they give them a starting kill right away, because they knew that most people would take these paths, and if they chucked a grenade right at the beginning in this place, that if someone walked right in the right spot, they would be able to kill them right away.
Yeah.
It was blind tossing. It was in some ways it might seem like a Hail Mary, but they were like, we figured it out that these are the most common paths. If we chuck a grenade this way, this angle, looking at this spot, it's going to land in this area, which has a high probability of killing someone. And other teams know that, so they go, well, I won't walk there. So it's always an evolving, changing thing, because these were the common areas, but now everyone's chucking grenades there, so now we have to move to these areas, and now people have to adapt to their grenade throwing. It was very interesting. And again, it's all about efficiency.
Hey, I need you to go solo here for like 30 seconds, because I just realized I forgot to defrost my chicken that I'm cooking for Kylie tonight. So I need you to take over for like 30 seconds while I take my chicken out of my fridge.
So we'll talk into our next subject. I'm going to bring up this movie that's coming out that Peter Jackson's doing, and it has nothing to do with elves or goblins or trolls or other mythical things. It has to do with World War I. Which people often think about as the Great War. The first World War was crazy. The part that I think is crazy about this, now that Evan's got his chicken, and we've talked about
and shrimp, actually. Yeah, keep going.
We were talking about this movie. I think it's officially named "They Shall Not Grow Old." First of all, it's a world war. What a hard word to say sometimes.
World War.
Whoa. WW1. Is
WW,
because again last week we talked about WW2, so now we're talking about WW1, and the next week WWE. But anyways, this movie's about it's a documentary about the soldiers specifically, and about just the life of the soldier in World War I. But it's not anything other than using original footage. And the crazy part is, again, this was like the beginning of film as a technology. So it is not quality.
19 teens, right?
Yeah. So it's crazy because he took original footage and he made it look like real life. And it's not perfect, but it's amazing because, again, this is a silent black and white, and he made it color with sound by doing Foley and doing voiceover and all this stuff.
What's the name of it again? I'm gonna look.
They Shall Not Grow Old. If you haven't gone and see the trailer, you gotta check it out. I don't think they have an official release date yet for it, but it is amazing.
I pulled up the trailer right here.
Also incredibly tedious. It's incredible work. Because the main issues they face when doing this, first of all, the footage back then, how you did it was you had a guy with a camera that had a crank. So cranking in itself is an inconsistent thing. People aren't perfect when they're cranking. So the footage, none of it is consistently the same speed or the same frame rate.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, this is Evan's now experiencing where it switched into color, and it's just incredible. Yeah. It's like all of this was originally silent.
Oh my goodness.
They had to get professional forensic lip readers in. Like this guy talking, like they had to read his lips and guess what he's trying to say. All the voiceover is interviews from soldiers, not from last month, but from like decades ago they used to tell the story. And so, like,
this looks like he filmed it this year.
yeah,
This is actual footage.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, look at that.
Oh,
You guys
was
have
so
to watch
insane.
it. You have to watch it.
This war was so ridiculous.
Yeah. So all of this is, crazy technology because most of the stuff is in 14 frames, 15 frames roughly a second. Again, it's variable. So they had to first then, get the footage to the correct speed. Then they had to fix all the footage. So lots of times there's, weird blemishes and tears and stuff. And so some of those things they're doing one frame at a time repair on. Where they have to go in like in Photoshop and take every single individual frame and make it and fix them. Some of the stuff where the colorization they don't have to do individually framed. They can do processes that can they can set the colors and they'll follow along with the people. But a lot of it takes a lot of individual framework. And then they also had used software that could take frame 1 and frame 3 and make a frame 2 because they weren't at the same speed, so they had to make up frames every once in a while because of these different speeds. And so you had to get all of that. They had to make sure the black and white was correctly done because sometimes it was poorly exposed, and so they had to go in and they had to fix it.
So it was like all white, you're saying?
Well, like the contrast isn't right, or like the footage was like was exposed to something and it didn't process properly.
Right.
And again, this is some footage was just unusable, so they obviously couldn't use it. But some stuff like, oh, this one, just got a little screwed up. We can go in and we can fix it by adjusting stuff to kind of fix it. And
if you think about Peter Jackson's career, he's always pretty much been on the cutting edge of these technologies.
Oh, he's about technology.
He's like pushed the film industry in a couple ways.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's not like he is credited as being a great director and producer and filmmaker, but he's never in like that top tier. It's always like, oh, Peter Jackson does these awkward, weird things that are great for cinema, but
yeah, like Lord of the Rings is his main thing.
That's unreal what I just saw.
Yeah.
Like that did not look like 100-year-old footage.
Yeah,
at all.
It's amazing what they did because, it just you can't understand when you look at the old footage, it doesn't look like real life because
right.
It's all weird speed. It's weird juddery. It's black and white. It's silent. But then, soon as the color comes in and all that where all the work he's done, it's like all of a sudden you're like, whoa.
Well, and it's because we get so caught up in and like somewhere in our minds we can't understand that when we look at that footage that they were seeing color the same way that we do today.
Yeah,
like our brains forget that. Oh, they're seeing the world literally the exact same way we were. They were seeing war in color the way we see war now, but we don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
And again, when there's old you can look at Civil War pictures, and they're always in black and white, and you're like, oh wow, they were they were seeing the colors the same way that we do. We just forget that they were.
Yeah.
So the fact that he did this is pretty incredible because we can see the war the way that they saw the war.
Yeah, so
which was again a horrendous war.
So it's pretty interesting. So like you get, so I can't imagine he has to have multiple teams working at the same time in all this footage because there's no way one group can just push through all this because it's so meticulous.
It seemed like it was mostly British footage. I mean, I'm pretty sure
he's Australian.
But he's Australian. I think he spends a whole bunch of time in London though.
Yeah, so there's a lot of British stuff. Again, it's just where he get footage, and there's actually some German footage. There's all sorts of different footage.
That's interesting.
And the war is really interesting too because again, we get caught up in World War II, which was a much more dramatic and like like an idea war too, because it's about democracy and freedom fighting tyranny and fascism and communism and all sorts of different isms that are all involved. World War One was more of a.
Wasn't it more land based?
It was about land. It was about colonialism. It was about empiricism or imperialism. That's the word.
Yeah.
Empiricism is empirical, not imperial. All right, there we go.
Because wasn't what? Okay. I don't know.
So, anyways,
wasn't it like the Ottoman Empire was?
You have Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
You have different groups. Germany's definitely involved, and there was a lot of familial stuff because all the rulers were all interrelated, like they're all cousins and stuff. So you have that, and you also have about land and about that kind of stuff, and it was about money, and it was a war.
Dude, how like here's the deal though. If you look at World War I pictures, you'll see some of like the not like scariest, but like the most bizarre, like because of they started to use. Weren't they using toxic warfare at that point, like with certain gases?
They were doing gases. The World War One was brutal because
it was so brutal.
But at the same time, it was one of the most horrendous technology wars because it was just about there was no concern for the people on the ground. It was
exactly.
But at the same time, the people on the ground, they talk. There's some other trailers and you have interviews and stuff. I watched a bunch of stuff. Once I saw the first part, I was just like lost. I was like, this is amazing.
Hey, are they really? How's he releasing it?
I don't know.
Theaters or is it Netflix?
I don't know. I haven't seen any details on it. All I know is that it's happening.
It said that it was being distributed by Warner Brothers. So I don't know, but I'm guessing that they're going to put it out in theaters first.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing deserves to be recognized by everybody. But what was I saying? Oh yeah,
ground units.
The ground units, the people. So like they really didn't have that much. Animosity towards the other side. They had a lot of respect for each other, from one side to the other.
Well, because even in the trenches, they would have ceasefires where it's like, okay, like we're like, if it's certain days of the year or if it's a holiday, we're gonna celebrate on our side, 100 yards apart.
Yeah, and so like they would capture people and they would just like the people who were captured would just start helping out. Like they're not fighting their side, but they're the ones now like picking up bodies and they're the ones now like helping dig trenches and they're the ones like doing stuff because there was like they were captured and they were like, all right, now like I'm gonna just like do what I need to do to keep doing my there wasn't this animosity, there wasn't this hatred where they're like you ruined all this stuff. They both understand that this is not a war that they're necessarily invested in on a like emotional level. I know there were some really tough parts of the of the fronts where there's just a lot of stuff going on where there could be some more localized animosity towards people, but there's plenty of parts where and then they show this where the people talk about it as being like this kind of dangerous camping where like they weren't necessarily getting bombed and stuff, but if you got too exposed you might get shot at, but they were like having fun hanging out, like just kind of like and also there was this war there wasn't very diligent about keeping young people out. They said that there was a lot of like people who 14 to 16 was a lot of people like that young in the trenches, pretending to be 18 or 20 or whatever, and they weren't, and they just kind of turned a blind eye to it.
And like one point you just brought up is interesting because when you look at World War II and you see the American side of it, and especially in depictions of it, whether it's Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, when Americans see Germans, like just how it's portrayed is the Americans get blood in their eyes and they just want to kill Germans because they're German. Same way from Germans looking at Americans. Like they just wanted to kill Americans because they were Americans. It seems like in World War I, it wasn't really like an American, or it wasn't a country versus a country. It was like soldiers just fighting a war against other soldiers. And like it doesn't seem like they necessarily hated them.
It was a job.
It was exactly. It was their job, and they were at war, so they went to war against these people. And there was like this weird respect there where I feel like in World War II, there was a lack of respect, whereas in World War I feel as though the soldiers respected each other. They fought because, again, they were in a war, and that was their job to do.
Yeah, there's a common phrase. It's like no more brother wars kind of thing, where these people, again, were very, very much didn't view themselves as like us versus them and stuff. And you had people who moved, they were, German by birth, but lived in England and then moved back to join to fight the war. But they had it's kind of confusing stuff like that. So it's, it's very different than wars now. Wars now we get, I think some of it is, again, we do fight a lot more wars of ideas now. Like
and it's like wars. You're right. Wars now are more ideas, but they're also more information based. And like I just said, like again, they're all information based and getting. I don't know where the enemy's going to be. Whereas those old wars were like, okay, we're going to meet on a battlefield.
Yeah, yeah. I also think that there's a bit more. They now sort of build up this like us versus them mentality because it helps soldiers perform better when there's someone to hate. It's a lot easier to pull the trigger on someone that you've been told is evil than someone who you could respect. Like it's a little bit of it's a different mentality. It's really easy for you to convince your whole army that the other side is evil. You shouldn't respect them. You shouldn't like them. You should want just to get rid of them, because then when it comes to pulling that trigger, they're going to do it. Right and wrong, hard to say there. It's something that I think that is tough because, people are people and we shouldn't be, I don't think we should dehumanize people to the point where, we can, and some of that is in the leadership side of World War I, they did that. They dehumanized. It was just numbers. Mm-hmm. And that's where they can easily drop these horrible, toxic, gases on people and all that stuff, and flamethrowers and that sort of that horrible warfare that we had back then. Because in many ways, a bullet is much more humane than your lungs being on fire from a toxic gas. So there is just as much as we have created this mentality in war to be able to easily pull the trigger, we've also have cleaned up the warfare we do, because we're not torturing people with mustard gas, and we're not napalming anymore. We're not doing these awful things that they used to do back then, because it was in the leadership end. They were just numbers.
It was numbers games. Yeah, it was definitely more faceless. I feel World War I was definitely more faceless, definitely more nameless. It was definitely more based off of numbers, like you're saying. Like we were talking about earlier, though, when you look up pictures of World War I, you just see, you see like severe war tactics, mm-hmm. and the old school gas masks just looked scary, and like these tanks that they were using were very primitive and mm-hmm. just they looked like killing machines, and it was just a very harsh war. And the idea of they were getting out of the battlefield sense of war, where it's like, okay, you fire, then we fire. They just did that in trenches.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So it still had that 1800s war feel, but was very different in its own way from World War II. It was kind of this like hybrid of 1800s and 1900s wars in this single war.
Yeah. And actually, this is something that I've heard before. This is more at a larger picture of war, but that, genetically, the genetic pool of humanity has been slowly worsened, and that's what, like, this is a theory on why disease and other things goes up over time, is because the most fit and capable people we send to the battlefield to die. So we keep sending people who are good to die, and the people who aren't as capable or who have issues that make them medical unqualified issues are the ones who stay back and reproduce.
That's and so interesting.
We're amplifying the issues. Like maybe poor vision was something that was not nearly as common, but because we sent people who had good vision out to die, and a lot of those died and then didn't return to then reproduce.
That's so interesting.
Humanity in some ways has worsened their genetic pool because of war in itself.
And in the last 100 years, you can see where that would certainly be the case.
Because we've had wars with unprecedented numbers
Dude, you think of Russia, if that theory is what actually happens, you think of Russia and how many millions they lost in the first half of the 1900s due to war. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Russia is a crazy. They have crazy war tactics.
They lost so many people.
Because the numbers they don't have a true number because it's all estimates. So you have these wide ranges because they didn't really keep track, and they literally were just like, if you're a person, you're fighting, and we give you the cheapest stuff. Like they didn't supply their soldiers with very much when it comes to
nothing close to what the Germans had. Because didn't the Germans have the more like just the better materials for war?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, they definitely employed more technology, and they definitely where they suffered was in consumables, so food and ammunition. They just had
whereas the U.S. was incredible with that.
Yeah. We could supply the needs of the soldier on the day to day, but like clothes and stuff like that.
Russia just had hand-me-downs basically.
Russia was just like, hey, take your best clothes that you got because that's what you're wearing,
and you're forced to do that, by the way.
Yeah, and they just so like Russia's who knows, like, and that's just a theory, and I'm not a geneticist to know if that is a valid theory, but it's something that I thought that is very interesting. Like we do, in many ways, send our most equipped to go and pay the price for the people who are ill-equipped. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm not saying like no one go join the army anymore. Like that's not what I'm saying. But it's an interesting concept that we if we wanted the long term humanity to be the most to increase and be more and be better, we should
physically
mentally all sorts of stuff.
Because the fact of your courage that you have to be mentally strong to be at war.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think that they put smart people in charge of groups of soldiers.
Right,
they still were out there fighting. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting because again,
you'd think the greatest leaders in our country's history have been in war.
Yeah,
because they just get great leaders, or they develop great leaders.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And a lot
of them have died in war.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that, and we've sort of turned that around now. Modern warfare is more about it's warfare of technology.
Sure.
It's a little more nuanced and tactical outside of the soldier itself. We do have plenty of ground troops doing stuff, but there's a lot of it's preempt with strikes,
recon, and getting information on when to
when to do stuff. And they also it's about shutting down supplies. So when we are fighting a group, we do our best to make it so they can't get the things they need to be able to function as if we can shut off what they need to be able to do the things that they're doing. Yeah, like if they can't get bullets and they can't get food, they're going to give up pretty soon.
Which goes back to, today you're right, we're fighting ideas. We're not necessarily fighting countries. So it's not like these governments are providing, maybe these ideas are getting stuff from other governments, but it's not like their home country is making bullets, weapons, whatnot for these ideas. Because in a lot of cases, the governments hate the ideas. Yeah. Because they're trying to overthrow the government.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting, war has definitely taken a big shift. Again, we just talked about war this whole time. The last one we talked about war too.
Last one was war. I know.
We just like war.
Which
me too.
I know. We really enjoy war. And this started with steroids, which started with, I forget what our first topic was, but I wanted to ask or just bring up because we were talking about German technology. Some of the stuff that the Germans were trying to accomplish or figure out or research into in World War II. Have you ever?
Some of it's bonkers, and some of it's
insane.
Some of it's pretty cool.
And the stuff that they were trying to do with aliens when World War II, do you know like a lot about that? Like they were trying to do so much extraterrestrial stuff and create so many air possibilities.
Yeah, and some of it was you got crazy people that made a lot of claims that they could do stuff, and they got the funding to do it. Yeah. You had some valid concepts, but you also had a lot of people. I think some of it also is there's a lot of yes to a lot of ideas, but that wasn't mean that was like wasn't like I don't think Hitler was always obsessed with aliens. I think that there was people who were like they were saying, hey, we can figure this out.
He's no Tom DeLonge, you know.
Yeah, like if we could figure this out, we can win because we can employ way better stuff and we can be able to dominate. And he's probably just like thumbs up.
Yeah.
But
he's like, good, you guys are buying in.
Yeah. So like there's some of that where you have the people wanting to exploit the system. You know, this crazy leader wants every way to win. So we want to see if we can, you know, we'll tell him whatever we need to tell him so we get the funding to do the things that we want to do.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, like that's what happens. So that happens nowadays. You might be hearing my keys jingle.
Oh, that's your keys.
I thought
it was like a mouse or something.
It's a little mouse sneaking around his house. So yeah, you think about people do that nowadays. You have people who want to get government contracts for stuff, so they'll sell a bill of goods and then they go belly up. I mean, same thing with green energy. The government's promoting a bunch of green energy initiatives. So they're like, we'll give you a bunch of funding, and they're like coming in. They're like, all right, the future is dental floss, and they're like, and they try to sell them on that, or
government's like, all right, we're gonna throw some money at you. If it sticks, great.
We can use used dental floss to the renewable energy, like just stuff like that, and then they if they get convinced, the government does get convinced that this will work, they give a bunch of money, and then when it doesn't work, they go belly up. So there's some of that, but then you also people get just shut down. So again, when people keep just throwing 100 ideas at the wall, some of them do stick and they do try things. So that is why I think World War II there was, especially for the German side, a lot of weird stuff. I mean, they were like, doing mind control stuff.
Yeah, they were trying to genetically alter soldiers and whatnot too, to make them whatever. And again, people were just wanting to be tested on, and a lot of people got really messed up over it.
Yeah, and some people weren't willing to test on the horrible things they did to Jews.
Yeah,
well, like that was that, and the way they killed them was obviously horrendous, but some of the other stuff they did that before killing them was just unbelievably messed up. Like it's sickening to think some of the stuff that people had to go through.
I wonder what German history books talk about when it comes to World War II. Like that'd be an interesting thing to learn about, because like they tortured millions of people. What do their history books say? That'd be interesting.
I think they, in some ways, have a similar mentality that America has about slavery in the educational system.
Like, this was our past.
Yeah.
That was not good.
Yeah.
We don't do this anymore.
Yeah. So I think, and there's probably some guilt and shame involved, which, I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I mean, in some ways they should. But it's like, at the same time, we aren't those people. And I think there's a lot of issues in society where people are conflated with ancestors, where like the people in Germany are several generations, like 2 generations at least removed.
Yeah,
and these people have
it's removed at this point.
Like they aren't a part of that, and they shouldn't be held to it. Mm-hmm. Just like we should not be held to the actions of the slave masters,
1800s,
because
white male
we weren't. And what I think is also, for both you and I, we are both descendants of immigrants who came to America after slavery was over. So we really, it's like
my dad came over on a boat. Like,
yeah, like we can't be blamed for that kind of stuff.
So like, and what's so interesting about this is our ancestors. Again, my dad and his family got treated like crap when they got here.
Yeah.
In the 50s.
Yeah.
Your ancestors, the Irish ancestors, got treated terribly.
Oh yeah, the NENA is an acronym. No Irish Need Apply. That was like Irish people couldn't get jobs. That's why half of the railroad was done by the Irish.
Yeah,
half the transcontinental railroad was built by the Irish. Other half was built by the Chinese, coming from coast to the middle. That's what they did.
That's right.
Eastern half was mostly done by Irish because no one wanted them. I mean, like.
We're not like that. That's not slavery. Like, again, it's not like they were being whipped, but I feel like they were being discriminated against in a pretty severe way.
Oh yeah, I mean you had again, like they're all living in one house. You had 14 Irish people living
they're just being treated like
size
dogs.
of a kitchen, and that's just how it was. And I mean, again, a lot of Irish came over because of what was happening in Ireland. They were escaping
rebels, right?
Well, you had disease issues. You had famine issues.
You had famine. What am I
Potato
talking about?
famine was a big thing. You also had ideological issues where you had Protestants versus Catholics, where they're
That's right.
killing each other like crazy. So they're like, you know what? We're just going to go to that place over that big piece of water so that we don't have to get killed.
Right.
Stuff like that. So it's just like prejudice is just something that happens, and it's not a good thing. But we also can't. It's like we can't try to relate to that because right now we aren't experiencing it. Like we aren't experiencing prejudice right now. So
right.
how can we then be mad about it?
Mm-hmm.
Like we can be mad that it happened, but we can't be. There's not like if I met somebody who was someone who's still living from the time when Nina was a thing,
right.
I'd be mad at them,
right?
Because they were part of that happening.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that their grandchild I can be upset at. Like I can go
right.
up to somebody who I can somehow trace descendants doing that and be mad at them. Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, we can't do anything compared to what happened to whatever. If it's a race, if it's a people group that happened in the 1800s, early 1900s, we can't do anything.
Yeah, it
that
has happened.
That has happened. That has happened. All these wars we're talking about, we can't do anything. We can talk about them now, and
understand.
And bring us back to the Germans. Like you said, they're a couple generations removed at this point. Their grandfather, great grandfather, killed a whole bunch of Jews. They can't do anything about that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
and I think like did people just have to accept that? I don't know.
Yeah. We have to move forward. We have to understand, and we have an obligation not to let it happen again. But we have no obligation to pay for the sins of these of people that we don't have any connection to. Like, you know, it's just weird. It's weird.
Yeah, we're in a weird shift in our society when it comes to responsibility. I feel like responsibility is now started to be given too much attention.
Well, but responsibility shifts off of, in a lot of ways, it shifts off of people onto other people. Like it's their responsibility, pointing at other people. When most of the time we're responsible for ourselves,
right? And so that what you just said is it's happening too quickly nowadays. Whereas, sure, it's happened slowly over the past 100 years, but responsibility is being shifted from person to person way too quickly, and from people group to people group way too quickly nowadays, without stopping to think about the reality of the situation.
Yeah,
it's like, well, I'm just mad. Someone has to be responsible for this. I'm going with these people. They're responsible.
Yeah. So I think we are responsible for ourselves. Things that happen to us, we have to analyze. Like, and again, I'm not saying that if you get mugged, it's not your fault. But at the same time, why did you walk down this scary alley at 2 a.m. in New York City? I mean, there's a little bit you got to take and give here. At the same time, like, but we can't say that it's like, or we can't blame groups. You can't, like, there's got to be personal responsibility, and there's also, you got to understand that things happen, and that yes, someone shouldn't have done that, but that doesn't mean that we need to like start like how to say this appropriately.
I know, right? I'm trying to skirt words here.
You have to walk a fine line here. Bad things are going to happen, and people do bad things. If you don't want bad things to happen, you don't want people. Yeah. So
we live in a fallen, sinful world,
and it's not something that it's going to. It's not group by group. It's not like this group is unique because they do these sorts of bad things, and if we want these sorts of bad things to stop, we need to blame this group. That's the wrong kind of thinking. So we need to. There are things that are culturally happening inside of a group that we need to change the culture of, but that does not mean that it's something that is indicative of a specific group just because they're that specific group.
Correct.
Like you can't. It's not. That's the problem. It's like you can't say that a certain group is going to do them because they're that group. There's a culture in that group that we might need to change, and in many ways that group needs to be responsible to themselves to fix it. But also we also as being human need to work with each other to make things better. But at the end of the day, like, actions have consequences, and we shouldn't ignore that either.
Yeah. And that's being lost. But just to kind of end this, this is what's frustrating about this entire topic that we were discussing.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. Is what you just said. A whole bunch of people are saying that, but no one's really doing it.
Oh yeah.
That's what's frustrating about all this. Is what you just said is completely true, and so many people who have a larger voice than we do are saying that.
Greater influence
Than we do are saying that, but they're not doing it. And actions are just not being backed up. I should say words are not being backed up by actions, which is frustrating.
All right, well, time to work. Time to head off to work. And again, check us out on Twitter at BeforeWorkPod, and our email is beforeworkpodcast@gmail.com.
Shout out to the person in Australia who listened to us this past
Australia.
week. We thank you, Australia.
Growing internationally.
Good day. Good day to you.
Yeah, so they're probably going to bed now. That's probably what they're doing, not going to work. So
hey, sweet dreams, Australia. Sweet dreams.
And for those in the this part of the world, go have a good day at work. Do a good job. Work hard. Make that dollar bills, y'all.
Dollar bills, y'all. Ship the juice.
All right. Bye.